Hello, and welcome back to our reading in the book, Guiding Principles, The Spirit of Our Traditions. This is Tradition 7, as it relates to NA service bodies. This section is titled In Service. Service bodies, like our groups, decline contributions from outside NA. Our service bodies, however, are not autonomous and do not support themselves. Members and groups provide the direction and support necessary for our services to continue, and our service bodies operate within the means provided. Most of the time, in most of the fellowship, our services operate on tight budgets. Strong faith and hard work created our fellowship, and the same spirit of selflessness, resourcefulness, and joy in service sustains us today. When we are excited about carrying the NA message through service, we can see how much there is to be done. Our enthusiasm brings Na to life, but it can also run away with us. When we commit to more than we can handle, we start feeling that old desperation creeping in. It takes time to build services that we can sustain and that will sustain us. It's our responsibility to keep an eye on whether our efforts in service are building up or burning out. The investment of time and energy that is called for in building solid, reliable services pays off in solid, reliable NA communities. Self-support means we support the services that support us by providing the necessary time, money, training, and compassion. Our informational pamphlets, Money Matters, and Funding NA Services each offer thoughts and guidance about adequately supporting our services. We give not just to take care of ourselves, but to make our message available to addicts near and far. The money we give is not just for our group or for NA locally. The funds passed on to other levels of service help NA as a global fellowship to fulfill our vision for NA service. When we ask our service bodies to do something, we need to give them the resources to carry out our instructions, which means we will support them with our time, money, and enthusiasm. In addition to making sure we provide adequate support, we need to think about sustainability. Each time we ask our service bodies to take on a new commitment, will our community be willing to support this over time? We discuss whether the level of commitment required is realistic for us, as well as other obligations that already exist. Trust in the process and in our higher power helps us sort out what we want, what we need, and what we can afford. Our message is free, but carrying it is not. Money is a necessity to keep many of our services operating, and the money that comes in through the basket is not always sufficient to cover those costs. Much of what we accomplish in service is funded by income from events, merchandise, literature sales, and so on. This has been the subject of debate and contention at times, but the fact remains, the portion of our income that comes directly from member contributions does not pay for all that we do in NA service. Our practice of this tradition is not served by lecturing one another about our inadequate contributions. As a fellowship, we are often more willing to participate in fundraisers than to contribute directly. The responsibility rests with each of us to determine what balance of fund flow we consider acceptable, and to work toward that balance by stepping up in whatever way seems right to us. However, we do want to make sure that our efforts do not lead us to actively solicit money from those who are not members. For example, we may sell refreshments at an NA event, but we don't have a bake sale at a shopping center. If our events begin to take on a greater sense of importance than supporting our groups or reaching addicts in our community, we might want to look at our priorities. We want to ask ourselves whether money is diverting us, whether it's contributing to our unity or our division, and whether we are losing our sense of purpose. Goodwill and enthusiasm are attractive, and when we can see our contributions in action, we want to give. When fundraising starts to seem like the most important thing we're doing, our priorities are out of proportion. It can be very easy for a service body that is funding itself, or that is financially dependent on events and conventions, to lose touch with its accountability to the groups. Our concepts remind us that our service boards and committees are always answerable to the groups we serve, and our second tradition reminds us that a higher power is ultimately in charge. Every NA service body can benefit from periodically checking to see that its priorities are properly aligned with the primary purpose. And a simple way to do so is to look at where our human and financial resources are allocated. Events or activities may be easier to find trusted servants for than public relations or H&I panels. By practicing the faith that is necessary in order to be self-supporting, we do a much better job of allowing a loving higher power to care for us. As we read this, addicts are finding hope and freedom in jails and institutions all over the world. Isolated addicts are connecting with other NA members online, through the mail, and at conventions and service workshops. They are bringing in a home to places it didn't exist before. Somewhere in the world right now, addicts are gathered in a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. All of this happens through the energy, love, hard work, commitment, and generosity of addicts who have come together in desperation and found a new way to live. Our tradition of self-support keeps us alive and free. We can be creative in the ways that we gather resources and careful in how we use them. We must be very cautious in our relationships with those outside the fellowship, continually checking our practices and motives to ensure that we are not accepting gifts or support that might compromise our integrity. Tradition 7 invites us to learn more about integrity and what it means to stick to principle without being rigid or ungrateful. When we practice Tradition 7, we don't just turn away the donations of others, we demand of ourselves that we step up and meet our responsibilities. We learn that we can care for ourselves and meet our needs. We can thrive and grow as a fellowship, even when resources are really thin. Generosity is an antidote to fear, and when we give freely, our hearts are filled. The value of this tradition may be hard to see when we are deciding not to ask for help from those outside NA who would gladly offer support. But Tradition 7 in our basic text reminds us that everything has its price. Practicing self-support allows us richness beyond measure. When we support ourselves responsibly, as individuals, as groups, and as a fellowship, we are rewarded in confidence, dignity, and freedom. We are responsible members of society today, and the reward for that is hope for the future. Thanks for listening. The question for Tradition 7 in service will be below in the description box. Please answer the questions provided or add your own questions. The next section will be Tradition 8 for members.